Taking a little bit of a detour today. It's a 2018 Ford Fiesta, 1.6 liter, 4-cylinder. Head gasket has let go, so that's what I'm getting into now. The heater core had failed and it caused the engine to overheat a few times. The heater core has since been replaced. Ran great for a few weeks, but then just decided to let us know that the head gasket was bad by overheating, losing coolant. So a combustion vapor test revealed, blue fluid turns yellow, or whatever flavor you have. So I've just gotten started here. I drained all the coolant out the lower radiator hose, and I've started disconnecting all the little wiring harnesses, clips, and things like that to get out of my way. Now I'm going to get this intake manifold and throttle body off of here, get the belt and the alternator out of the way, and then pull the plugs out, get the valve cover off, expose those cams, get this timing cover off of there, and then we'll start on getting the cams off. And we've got some 15mm bolts, well, one bolt and one stud. The stud goes in there like this. It's got inverted Torx on this side, so you can pull the nut off, and then just back that whole stud out with a inverted Torx socket. Then you've got a 13mm nut holding the battery cable and one wire harness that you just push to disconnect, and the alternator comes out. There are several 10mm bolts holding the intake manifold on there. It's going to help if you pull the throttle body off. It's got 4 Torx screws holding it on there. Remember, it goes into plastic, so you're not going to use an impact to put that stuff back together. It's got an O-ring seal in there, so you'll need to replace that on reassembly. And you can see we've got some soup down in there from that failed head gasket. It's making some juice. This can be gross when I pull it off and pour it out. Okay, so I've got the throttle body off, I've got all the bolts out, getting ready to pull this intake manifold out, but it's got these 2 little hoses on the bottom that you need to pull off. One of them just has a regular hose clamp that you can squeeze with some pliers to pull off of there. But this one, what I'm using is a trim removal tool. You push that red retainer down, give it some downward pressure into the intake, and then it will let go of this plastic hose. Be careful with it, you don't want to break any of this stuff. TRQ has a video of the intake removal process from start to finish, so this is just kind of the summary of it, but this is definitely one of the things you want to watch out for so you don't break it. And with this off of the car, you can see that little clip in there. Once it's pushed down, it allows all those little tabs to kind of open up, so then the hose can get pulled out of it. And this is what the end of that hose looks like. It's not flared or anything, it's just straight tube. Okay, so now that I've got that stuff out of the way, I can take the timing cover, spark plug wires, valve cover off. Oh, and let's not forget about the soupy mixture in there. I was kind of eager to see what this looks like, feels like, smells like. Just pour it out. Yeah, definitely some coolant and some oil mixed up. Oh, and if you're going to pull your ignition apart, like pull the plug wires all the way off, and you don't want to lose track of which one goes where. Even though these are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the easy part, but knowing which terminal they go on. So number 1 is the one that's forward and to the passenger side of the car. I'm in America, so driver on the left, passenger on the right. Number 2 is the one that's drivers toward the rear of the car. Number 3 is the one that's passengers to the rear of the car. Number 4 is the one that's drivers to the front of the car. Alright, I should mention, as I discovered, go ahead and crack loose the bolts on the water pump pulley before you take the belt off or anything. That should be one of the first things you do. I ended up having to put the alternator back on and the belt and pull the motor mount out. so I could use a little U-joint and an impact to get the last bolt out. So that would have saved me a lot of time by doing that first, just get them loose. But now I got my pile of parts there, and this is ready to have the timing belt off and pull the cams off. Got to take all that stuff off to send it to the machine shop. You invariably want to get the cylinder head resurfaced. You don't just want to slap a fresh gasket on those old surfaces. So before you even start this job, call around to make sure you have a local machine shop that you can take this stuff to. It's usually about 75 bucks to resurface a head like this. Make sure that you have a brand new surface, nice and flat, for the new gasket to mate to. So I'm going to continue disassembly. We're almost there. And when you're pulling the cams off, you see I already got the intake off. I've got the exhaust caps numbered. First, you're going to use a 8mm hex to pull the cap off of the end of the cam. And then you're going to use a T50. Let's see, what did I do with it? I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's a T50, maybe a 55. Pretty sure it's a 50. To get the bolt out of the pulley, and to crack this loose, you're going to have to hold the camshaft steel. It's got a hex machined into the shaft, so you can hold your wrench on the shaft to hold the shaft still while you crack this T50 off, which is like that. And then just pull your caps off. I've already got those loosened up. Cap 1, cap 2, cap 3, and cap number 4 for the exhaust. They are stamped with an I for intake and an E for exhaust. We have 2, 3, 4, 5 and 2, 3, 4, 5. So once that sprocket, that cog is off, then you can just pull the cam out of there. I've already marked an I on that one, so I know that's intake, which means that one must be exhaust. At this point, I want to clean these, and get all the oil off there so I can mark this, because these are shimmed, and you can't add shims. It's basically from the factory. It has to go in that designated spot. So I'm going to mark these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 intake, and do same for the exhaust. Pull those out, and then I can pull the bolts off of the head. And last thing before I pull the head bolts out, I'm going to go ahead and get the exhaust off. I've already taken the shield off of it, which is just a few 10mm. You got to disconnect the oxygen sensor from its harness to pass through that heat shield. And then there you have it. We've got a 13mm. Let's see, I think this is a 15mm. And we've got a 13 in my hand. Nope, this is a 15. So probably another 15 and a 15. So just this middle top one is a 13, the others are 15s. So those have to come out, then the header can come off, the bolts can come out of the head, and off she goes to the machine shop. And now the head is off and on its way to the shop. So for getting the exhaust manifold off, the best tool I found was an offset wrench. So these are plenty long to give you extra torque. You still kind of have to bump it with your hand. And when I say bump, I mean you're being pretty vigorous with it. It might hurt the palm of your hand, you got to smack it. But there's the exhaust manifold, the 15mm, and then that 13mm bolt that's in the middle. And of course the head, you may have to kind of pry something under it to get kind of stiction to break free. Let's see, from there, whenever you're trying to pick the thing up, if you leave the studs in the head, you'll just have to, I just reached under from the passenger side to pry the header off of the head to get space between the stud and the exhaust manifold or header. And then this thermostat housing, you've got a few bolts on it. See, 1, 2, 3, 4. One on the left, one on the right, and then 2 middle, top and bottom. So it should take about a day to get that head resurfaced, and then we'll put it back together with these. Not a lot of confidence in this brand. I've used this before, didn't work out so well, but we'll see with new machine work and some Felpro head bolts and put it back together.
This is a pretty long video. Time for a brief intermission.
Okie dokie, got the head back on there. It's been resurfaced, got a new head gasket in there. I should have showed you this a moment ago before I put the head on there, but pretend that the head is off and you've got the block exposed where you're looking at the pistons. That surface on the block, you want to get it nice and clean just like this surface, but you do not want to use an abrasive, so don't use a wire wheel, a brush, sandpaper, any of that stuff. Just try to use solvent like lacquer thinner or something on a rag, and you're just gonna have to scrub until your fingers hurt to get that clean. That is to ensure that you still have that factory smooth and flat surface for the gasket to bond to. You don't want to do all this work and then have a premature failure. So unless you're having your block resurfaced, just clean it with a solvent the best you can, and then put your new head gasket on there and start assembly. So what I'm going to do now that I've got the exhaust kind of bolted in place, I'm going to go ahead and put the head bolts in place and do the torque sequence on that, and then put these little the caps on the valve springs, and just continue putting stuff back on it. Oh, and I want to note, as you're reassembling stuff, you do want the number 1 piston at top dead center. So 1, 2, 3, 4. The number 1 piston needs to be all the way up. You achieve that by pulling this bolt out of this location. Comes out right there. It's a 10mm hex head, and what you see in there is, it's basically another bolt like this but longer, and that's the tool that's going to go in there. So when you spin the crank clockwise, it's going to stop up against that tool, and then when you go back up to the top of the car, you'll see that piston is all the way up at top dead center for number 1. That's where it needs to be for reassembly. Now, I do want to note, getting this tool in here, as other videos mentioned, you don't have to take the axle out, but you do have to clock the axle in a certain position. Let me go to the whiteboard and show you why. So, let's see if I can get a marker that works. Pretend we're just looking just where we were. We've got the axle coming out towards us. Here's the engine block over here. Here's that little bolt that we pulled out. So in here, it comes all the way in there, yeah? So that thing has to go in there, but we've got the axle right here. But the axle is not a perfect circle. If it were, then you can slip that bolt in there, no problem. But the axle has a little hump on it like that. So if this hump on the axle is in front of that hole, you're not going to be able to get that tool in there because you don't have enough distance between here. So you have to make sure your axle is clocked so that is back there. And now you have plenty of room to get that bolt inside the block. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of oil on the threads of these new head bolts. These are torque to yield. They do stretch, so you do want to use new ones. And then we'll plop them in the head. Now I've got all the head bolts bolted down to sequence with the 90 degree. And usually what I do is just put a paint mark on the bolts. So if I start up here at 12 o'clock, then I go 90 degrees, then I can come 90 degrees, simple enough. And then here's my last valve spring cover, the tappet. So these things are basically factory shimmed on the inside. You don't want to mix them up, just number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, intake, exhaust. I'm going to put a little bit of oil on the inside and then coat the outside with oil. For that, I just get a cap, an oil bottle cap of oil, and then I'll slip that in there and then ready to continue. Oh, and if you've already started disassembly at this point in the video, maybe you've discovered something that I left out. Whenever you're pulling these out, if you've got one of those magnetic wands, this is not magnetized, just for illustration. If this is magnetized, then it'll help you pick that thing out, because when those are covered in oil, that's a pretty tight fit in there, and they can be hard to pick out by hand. You can see it moves around enough. The exhaust, oddly enough, were much easier. They almost fell out versus the intake. Now I have laid the cams and the bearing caps in place. Nothing has been tightened down yet, so I'm going to thread all the bolts by hand and then start the torque sequence for this. As I tighten these caps down, it's going to push the cam down, so it's going to push those cam lobes into the valve spring. Some of those are going to get compressed, some will not. So you want to be careful, follow that torque sequence, and then once those are tightened up, then we can put the tool on the back side of the cam to position them with the gears on the front and put the timing belt back on. So now we're doing some valve checking for clearances. This cap is just kind of hanging out there. I've got these cam caps, they're not torqued down or anything. They're just mated to the surface where the cap mates with the head. And I'm just using a feeler gauge to go between the lobe of the camshaft and the tappet, or the valve spring cap. So you want your intake to be 10 to 14 thousandths, and you want your exhaust to be 14 to 18 thousandths. Now these caps you can get in different thicknesses, so they're factory shimmed. So if you need to make changes, for instance, this one is real tight. I've got 7 thousandths clearance and I need 10 thousandths, which means that those caps covering the valve spring actually need to be a little bit thinner by 3 or 4 thousandths of an inch. And you just grab the hex portion of the cam right here with your wrench and rotate this cam to get the long part of the lobe pointing up, so you're measuring against the lowest point of the camshaft. So really you can do 2 at a time. Like here, I can measure the exhaust number 1 and number 3, but on number 2 the lobe of the cam is pressing into the valve spring. Same on number 4, so you just have to rotate that. As you're spinning those cams by hand, you do want your crank backed off of number 1 TDC, so just go counterclockwise 90 degrees or so to ensure that number 1 and 4 pistons aren't all the way up. You don't want the valves to clash into the piston, so just give yourself a little bit of room to work with. And once we're done checking valve clearances, then we can start torquing down. Your torque sequence for these cam caps mirror each other, intake to exhaust. You're basically going from the middle outwards. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I'm going to put some anaerobic sealant on this front main cap. Plop that down there. Then we've got 17, 18, 19, 20. skipped a few steps just to save time, but basically the cam caps are torqued down. There's anaerobic sealant under the front primary cap, and these 4 bolts, the 2 long ones and the 2 short ones, were torqued down. So after that, these got, I think it was 62 inch-pounds plus 45 degrees. These 2 got 70 degrees, and then the short ones got 53 degrees. So now the caps are done, and I went ahead and put the locking tool on the back side of the cams. There's a slot in there, so this only goes one way. Then I've got the lock on the front of the cams. This basically only goes on there one way. You might notice there's a black dot here to the left of this groove, and a blue dot here on the intake cam to the right of this groove. And this tool is only going to go on there one way. Sometimes there's an arrow that's going to point up. This tool didn't have that, but one of these arms is longer than the other one, so it's only going to go on there one way. So once I had the cams locked into position, I could put the pulleys torqued down. So this T55 bolt is going to get 18 foot-pounds plus, I think, 75 degrees. And for getting the belt on there, I took the tensioner off, and it's got, you can see where that grenade pin is in there. It's got 2 tabs, square tabs with a hole, and with the belt off of there, those tabs are going to be spread apart like that. So you have to pull that tensioner off. I just brought it over to my vise and got, just put tension on those, squeeze those 2 tabs together until they lined up. Then I can put that grenade pin in that hole and carefully handle that thing to stick it back on the block, tighten up that 13mm hex bolt, and you're going to kind of preload some tension on the front side of the belt because the tensioner is going to do its job of tightening up the backside. This is where you want the slack in order to get it over your tensioner before you pull that pin out. So at this point, I can pull the pin out. The timing belt will be tight, and I know my cams are phased correctly because the tool will not go in there if it's out of time. So it's just going to be a matter of making sure you get the belt on there correctly. And just for reference, these cams, intake, the lobe is kind of pointing toward the upper middle of the block. Same for the exhaust. The lobe's kind of pointing up here toward the top middle of the block. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that tensioner and get these locking devices off there and continue assembly. Okay, we snugged up the cam phasers. Those were 18 foot-pounds, and then you remove the cam locking tools from the front and the back, and you'll tighten these another 75 degrees, these 2 T55 bolts, and then you can put your tools back in there to make sure that nothing moved. While you have these tools off, you can put a wrench on the camshaft to hold the cam still while you tighten these 75 degrees. Reinstall all the locking tools to make sure nothing moved, and then take it all off again. Pull that pin out of the side of the block, so now you can rotate that crank 2 times over, and make sure your little line and dot are in the same place. So there's a little line right there, and I've got a little dot right here at 12 o'clock. So I just did 2 rotations, so we're timed appropriately and ready to keep on assembling. Quick note, and a big bummer for me, this little black plastic hose that goes here is supposed to go under the upper run of the intake but over the alternator, and I've just trapped it underneath the alternator. So now I've got to pull the belt and the alternator back off to get this hose up here so it can actually reach without rubbing anything.
How much time can we waste with simple mistakes?
And finally finish up correctly. This little coolant line actually goes on top of the fuel rail and intake manifold. It's got these little clips there, so don't miss that like I did. And I've got distilled water in it to kind of flush out some stuff. If for some reason it had green coolant in it, it's supposed to have the orange stuff, which is Dex Cool, but Ford has their own, whatever they want to call it. It's the same thing. And we've changed the oil because the oil had coolant in it. So let's see if it will run with no problems. Alright, I'm going to mark the mileage on the oil filter, 132,205. And we've got no codes or anything. Running nice and smooth. It's going to have some oil and stuff burn off just because when you disassemble and assemble an engine, it's easy to drip oil on the exhaust and things like that. So don't be alarmed with steam and smoke and things like that until the engine has a couple of heat cycles. So we're going to let it run like this, turn the heater on, make sure that distilled water runs through the heater core and everything. Then we'll drain the water once the engine cools off and add coolant, and off she goes.
Thanks for watching.